The Mental Health Series is brought to you by Microgains and Dominion Strength. Both are longtime friends and sponsors of the Barbell Logic podcast, and neither hesitated for a second in wanting to sponsor a series that they know is incredibly important to so many people. Both companies are true small businesses, American-owned, and 100% of all their products are made here in the United States. You'll hear more about that later in the show. For the finest quality fractional plates, visit microgains.com. That's with a Z, microgains with a Z.com. And for the highest quality leather belts, go to dominionstrengthtraining.com. Both use discount code LOGIC for a significant discount off their products exclusively for Barbell Logic listeners.
Welcome to Barbell Logic. Rewind.
Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. This is Matt Reynolds. We've got a special episode today. Unfortunately, Scott couldn't be here. I assume he's out planting his garden, planting his farm at the new farm he has. But we have Dr. Puder here today, who is, I would say, the official psychiatrist of all things Barbell Logic and Barbell Logic listeners. While saying that, obviously, he's not giving you specific psychiatric advice. He is a professional that we bring on to talk about good general things. That's what we're going to do today. We've been wanting to talk to you for a while in the midst of the craziness, man. We're in the middle of the COVID-19. Everybody's locked down. Only essential businesses are currently running, and people are worried. People are scared. People have anxiety. Lives have changed. And so I just wanted to bring you on to kind of talk through that today.
Yeah, I think if people are not stressed, then they may be stressed in the future. So this, we're in an interesting time because, before this, we were living a life that was fairly tranquil. No wars, no great pestilence for decades and decades, and not anything on our soil, at least in the U.S. So
sure.
In the U.S., we feel very protected, we feel very safe. And, if you're somewhere 30 to 50, you're like, okay, I got decades of life left, right? But now all of a sudden, there is a very real fear.
Yes.
That has affected everyone. It's like no one is not experiencing to some degree what has been going on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's really I was thinking about this last night. There are two primary things that I think are driving the fear. And while they are connected, I think the fears are sort of very different for people. Like one, I think a lot of people are scared that they're going to get sick or that members of their family are going to get sick. And as somebody who's had this disease and struggled with it for a few days, you could see with my pneumonia and having the thing, if I had taken a turn for the worse, I could be dead or could have been on a ventilator or whatever. And I'm a healthy, relatively young guy. Scott wouldn't say I was young, but we see reports of this, of, what we thought was a disease that really ravaged older people and that the younger generation was fine. And now we're coming to see that that's not exactly the case. At the same time, a huge percentage of people are completely asymptomatic that have this thing, like my wife was. She didn't have anything at all. So lots of people are scared about getting sick or their family members getting sick. And then you've got the entire other thing, which is the fear of the thing that has happened to the economy. The economy is a dumpster fire right now. And lots of people have been laid off from their jobs and are furloughed, are home, like their schedules have all changed. Even people that work, like the day doesn't look the same. And so I think there's a lot of fear there about, the finances, the economy. What's this thing not just going to look like today, but what does it look like 3 months from now, 6 months from now? So yeah, man, I think there's a lot of fear for people.
Yeah, it's going to affect everyone. I was talking to my wife and she was like, yeah, some of my friends are like home with their kids and, their spouses are home with their kids and they're in ministry and, and it's like, what a nice time it is for the family. And I'm like, love, like one, you don't know if they're freaking out. And two, it might be hard for them 3 to 6 months from now, and
right.
There is that sort of reality of this is going to be a difficult time for everyone in different ways. And I was thinking about like, okay, how would we define, Matt Reynolds' audience? Maybe middle-aged, mostly male, hardworking, smart, like wanting to work out, better their bodies, wanting to become an expert in strength, I don't know. Do you have any general other sort of ideas about who your audience is, how you would
Sure.
describe them?
No, I think that's great. And I think from a socioeconomic perspective, I think they're mostly middle class or upper middle class. And I think they find value in voluntary hardship. I think that's one of the things that is probably a defining factor for our listeners and for our clients is that they understand the value of voluntary hardship. And that's what an incredible, I didn't come up with that idea. Like I'd heard other people talk about that idea before, but this is why we train, right? Like we choose things that are voluntarily hard when times are easy. Like you said, when times are tranquil, when times are comfortable, we choose things that are hard so that when involuntary hardship gets thrown upon us, which has really happened to almost everybody on the planet over the past several weeks, we are better prepared to handle this thing that is hard, that we didn't get to choose. And I think that that is an important defining factor of both our listeners and our clients.
Yeah. So, for that reason, I don't think kind of like the survey that I did on TikTok, really works. Or even my patient population that I see, you have a different group of people. Now, I do treat some, CEOs and some executives and high functioning people. And so I think I do know kind of like how they're responding to this. And it's a little bit different. Interestingly, there are some patients who were anxious or did have severe OCD, obsessive compulsive behavior, like washing their hands 2 hours a day. They're not freaking out. And that was kind of a surprise to me is that some of these people, they were like, oh, it's interesting because like they're seeing everyone else be anxious for the first time. And they're like, oh, I know what anxiety feels like,
That's funny. Is that stat from your own small sample size of patients, or is that like something you've read about that even this is sort of a broader phenomenon?
This is just sample size of my own, people who are connected with me as patients, people who are connected with me maybe on social media who have told me like, actually, I've been feeling better. Now, that being said,
They're like, welcome to my world, everyone.
I have had a
Welcome,
number of,
enter.
Yeah, I have had a number of patients who have reached out to me acutely. I had one person with coronavirus who's at home, high anxiety.
Is that me? Are you talking about me right now?
No. No, you actually didn't even reach out. You didn't even reach out to say hi.
I figured your life was crazy and I was doing okay.
Oh, man.
So, I didn't even reach out to say
coming
hi.
back to that sort of voluntary hardship, episode 10 of my podcast, I talk about strength training and how it increases your total brain capacity. And I recently did a podcast on COVID-19 on delirium, kind of a deep dive for mental health professionals. And so there's a percentage of the population that are getting severely ill with COVID-19 that will get confused, hallucinate, violent. This is a unique population that as a psychiatrist, we treat in the hospital. We get consulted on this type of patient. So I did a podcast on that. And in a previous podcast, this podcast 10, when I talked about exercise and how strength training specifically seems to optimize sensorium. Specifically, when I talk about that, like total brain function, like, how like throughout the day, your sensorium may ebb and flow, like at 3 p.m., it may be lower. In the morning, it may be a little bit sharper. It's like your ability to think, focus, concentrate. And I really think that strength training and specifically muscle mass as well, like how much muscle mass you have, improves your total brain capacity. And a lot of people don't get that. They don't understand that. There's one study of people with low muscle mass, sarcopenia, increased the risk of developing delirium. This was like, 588 hospitalized patients. They looked at this. There's other studies that show that once to twice weekly resistance training over 12 months improves executive function. That's like the frontal lobe, the front part of the brain, selective attention, conflict resolution, whereas balance or tone training deteriorated function in the same study. There's another study, 10-week supervised progressive resistance training program performed 3 times a week, showed improvements in depression, improvements in bodily pain, vitality, social functioning. So there's all these studies that kind of point to, if you get severely ill, having strength will improve your chances.
Sure.
So that's one thing. Like, it's like, I would be hesitant to give that message to someone who hasn't worked out because they're like, oh, I guess I'm like doomed,
Right.
Like I'm not very strong. But
sure.
For your audience,
I was going to say, I would think I hope the vast majority of our audience is I'm sure they are. And I'm sure there's some that don't, right? I'm sure there's a small percentage that are like, we'll just listen to it for the content. Like we get emails about that sometimes, but it's never too late to start. And everybody has more time at home right now. I mean, that's really almost everybody has more time at home. And we've done lots of things for people to figure out how to continue, even to train for strength without optimal equipment, right? So if you got the equipment, you're golden. But if you don't, it's definitely more of a challenge. But we've taken up that challenge and we're ready to help people figure out how to continue their journey, their strength journey and their fitness journey, even if they're stuck in an apartment with no equipment. We've got things we can do.
That's good.
So,
That's good. And also coming back to this idea of voluntary hardship, I've been thinking a lot about Victor Frankl. He's one of my sort of psychiatrists that I look up to. Victor Frankl went through the Holocaust. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He's written a couple other books that I've read as well. If you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, this would be a good time to pick it up. Get the electronic version or Audible version, and you'll get through it pretty quick. And essentially, he was a psychiatrist, and he was, so he was already a mental health professional. And then because he was Jewish, he got sort of brought through the Holocaust as a prisoner. And he suffered through the same things that pretty much everyone suffered through. And he writes about his experience. And, before we started this, we were talking about how, that would be probably worse than what people are experiencing now.
certainly.
Now, of course, suffering is relative. And if you haven't suffered
Yeah, of
much
course.
in your life, this could be the biggest point of suffering. And I think if you're a mental health care worker listening to this, it's quite possible that you are experiencing something. And if you're on the front lines, you are experiencing something kind of like horrific and mind-changing. And I worry about those people. I worry that life will never be the same.
Sure.
Yeah. Have you read the book, or have you
I have
heard
not,
about him?
but
Okay.
as we started talking about it over the last 24 hours, now I'm definitely interested to get it. So I know we were talking a little bit before recording. The thing that he was able to do was find meaning and things that mattered in life in the midst of the worst possible situation, right? Like,
Yep.
I can't imagine anybody listening to this podcast being like, listen, we're in a pretty bad spot right now. We are not in a concentration camp. That's worse. And so that's not to make light of what we're struggling with at all. That here's a guy who was a prisoner in a concentration camp who found meaning in day-to-day activities in the midst of that crisis. I don't know. Do you have some of those quotes? Like,
Yeah.
man, some of the quotes you sent me were amazing.
Let me read a couple of the quotes. The way in which a man accepts his fate and all the suffering it entails, the way in which he takes up his cross, gives him ample opportunity, even under the most difficult circumstances, to add a deeper meaning to his life. It may remain brave, dignified, and unselfish, or in the bitter fight for self-preservation, he may forget his human dignity and become no more than an animal. Let me tell you what I think that means to me, and then you tell me if you have any thoughts on that one.
Sure.
So, there's this space between what we are going through, the tragedy that we are going through, and our response to it. We can't control the tragedy. We can't control that we are up against the chaos of the situation. For him, it was a Holocaust. For us, it is this great viral killer, right? We can't control that. But what we can control is our response to it. And so the way in which we take up our cross, now, this is not for what I can tell, he was not a Christian. So this is not like a Christian sort of image, but it is a Christian image
Right.
of a cross is like a crucible or something, that suffering that you take on, the weight of the suffering, right? For other people, it's that sacrificial suffering. The way in which you take that up, even in the most difficult set of circumstances possible. So when you have a choice to choose the way in which you will take up the suffering which is set upon you, that is what gives you a deeper sense of meaning. And if you choose to listen to the part of you that is guiding what you should do, right? We all, in our different set of circumstances, there is something that is calling us to live in a certain way in these times, and I'm guessing that voice is not telling you to hoard toilet paper. There's something else that voice is telling you to do something brave, dignified, and unselfish, right? And so then he says, or in the bitter fight for self-preservation to forget your human dignity and become no more than an animal. There is a part of our brain that is always speaking to us about self-preservation.
Sure.
There's another part of our brain that is speaking to us maybe about the herd instinct or to help the group, to help the family unit. It could be to consider the older people around you if you're younger. It's that other voice, right? And it may be more quiet. It may be a very quiet whisper of a voice. And the self-preservation may be very loud and maybe like, save yourself, do what's in your own interest, right? There's also the sexual sort of drive interest, right? That's always going on as well. So there's all these different parts of our brain that are speaking, but there's the part of you that chooses. That chooses which one to magnify and which one to bring down in intensity. And so essentially he's saying, you have the choice to listen to that part of you that is the part of you that is the human dignity. And if you listen to that brave, dignified, unselfish voice, that is where you can add the deeper meaning to your life. Here's another quote. And he said, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." So it's like you have this choice. And there were these people in the concentration camps. They were few in number, he says, but they were giving away their last piece of bread. And interestingly, what he said was that once they lost that sense of meaning, the sense of camaraderie, the sense of like, we're in this together, that's when they sometimes perished. They sometimes just died. Like he describes in the book, he would see people and it's like they just gave up. And there was a psychological sort of like, I'm just going to give into this and that fight was gone,
Yeah. His stories are amazing. And I think it's great because we can sit there and go like, look, some of these people were able to do this in the most dire circumstances beyond what we are currently experiencing. And when I think about it, one of our core values that we stick to that really drive what we do is that we choose right no matter what. Choosing rightly in the midst of like tranquility and comfort is not that hard. But choosing right in the midst of crisis is much more difficult, but I also think much more powerful, right? And so as I think through this, it's really about bringing some order to the chaos. There is a level of chaos that we cannot control that we are in today. And the chaos that people like Victor Frankl were in a concentration camp or even, far worse. But we have the ability to make choices on a daily basis in the midst of the chaos that brings meaning to our life and allows us to stay mentally strong. And so, it's pretty easy to live your life on a schedule when you have to be at work at 8 and you leave at 5 and you take your lunch break at noon. It's a lot different when you're at home and nobody's telling you when you have to be somewhere. It's easy to sit around in your pajamas all day and watch Netflix and eat junk food and get fat. It's another issue to say, wait a minute, I'm going to come out of this thing better than I went into it. And we're not talking about major things. We're talking about, I'm going to make sure, like whatever those small things are that bring you meaning. So you go, I've got more time to read and make my mind better. I've got more time to train and make my body better. I've got the ability to cook food at home and to spend more quality time with my wife and my kids. And so there are opportunities here that while, yes, there is a massive sacrifice for everyone, there are also opportunities to really find meaning in the day-to-day. So it's actually less what I'm hearing you saying. When I think about the people giving like their bread out to others, that's not this grand macro thing. That's a small step that they made that day that brought them meaning on that day. It was a perfect microcosm of what was actually going on in their hearts and their minds in the grand scheme of things, right? And I think that, and so, certainly there are true stories about this of people being in concentration camps or prison or prisoners of war or whatever those things are. And, you see the ones who were essentially continue to have meaning and bring order to chaos and then make it through. And then you see the people who don't, and they often die. We see this all the time, even in the movies we watch. You think about like dystopian type, future movies. There's always these characters, the hero characters in these sort of dystopian future movies that are the ones that kind of keep their shit together. And they're like, listen, we're going to do this and we're going to be organized and we're going to live, we're going to make right choices for people. And then there are always also characters in those movies who are like off the rails. They're like, oh, things are gone crazy. I'm going to give in to those animalistic natures, right? I'm going to eat whatever food I can get my hands on, and I'm going to have sex with whoever I can have sex with, and I'm going to kill whoever I can kill. And it's that, to me, that is giving into the chaos. You become part of the chaos rather than bringing order to the chaos.
Yeah. If I could jump to like, okay, there's different areas where we can bring order to the chaos.
Yeah. Let's do it.
There is the physical places that we live, right? We can bring order to the chaos. We can clean our room, organize our stuff, plant a garden, prepare for a year, of we're not sure what will come. We can write a budget. Sure. We can start to really think through like, okay, am I prepared if, this goes on for another 6 months? I, as a physician, and I'm looking at this, I'm like, how do we come out of this without, if we have a vaccine, that's an easy win, right? Everyone gets a vaccine. Okay. If
Sure.
we have effective treatment that's so good that we're not afraid of people getting it, okay, that's a big win. The antibody treatments probably look the most promising, but it's going to take some time to get those up on a scale that would actually be helpful.
Sure.
So until that happens, like there's going to be a need for social distancing. So there's going to be a prolonged, tracted period. And then there's going to be, sort of a recession afterwards. So we're kind of going into a season that we haven't experienced and we don't know what it's going to be like. And there's a lot of that chaos. And so it's like, okay, how do I bring order to my physical order, to the area around me, to my dominion, so to speak? How do I put my things in order? And I'm also aware like this is really hard,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's expand on that just a little bit. We've heard this. Jordan Peterson talked about, make your bed or clean your room. It's a great place to start. So can you talk a little bit about like, we're social distancing. Nobody's going to see the bed. Nobody's going to see the room. Why is it important to make your bed and clean? I mean, literally, like we're using that as an example, but we literally mean you should make your bed and clean your room, right? You should wash your dishes. You should bring order to your home, even though no one's going to be in your home other than you. Why is that important?
So I kind of like the idea that like your stuff will either drain you of energy and take time from you. Like everything you own will take a little bit of time from you. And so if you own a lot of things that are unnecessary for you to accomplish what you desire to accomplish, your goals, your purpose, then you're going to be taken away from doing those things, right? So for example, if I want to be a dad and eventually a grandfather, and my physical body doesn't have order, then it will take away from me accomplishing that mission. Or if, I want to be the best doctor I can and treat patients, if I'm physically exhausted all the time because I stayed up late watching Netflix, that will not allow me to accomplish that purpose. So in the same way, like cleaning
Sure.
your room, organizing your stuff, I think it's one step towards more of the order and less of the chaos. And we live in a time that's incredibly chaotic because we don't know the future. We don't know what's going on. And so I think that's why. Do you have any other thoughts on what?
I do. I mean, again, you're the psychiatrist. So but I think you're exactly right. The question is, we're bringing order to our life for who? For us. Like, I don't clean my house so it looks nice for other people. That's one of the things. That's a benefit, right? I don't want to have people come over to my house and have my house be trash. But for me, I need my house to be a place of solace and a place of peace and a place of order.
Yeah.
And we distinguish a lot on this podcast, me especially. I call it the difference between happiness and joy. And who knows if that's actually what it is, but it's the best way I know how to describe it, which is, there's an instant gratification part to, eating and drinking alcohol and watching Netflix and sitting in my pajamas. It's sort of given in to some of those lesser animalistic behaviors. And it might even make me feel happy for a short time, but it's fleeting and doesn't last. There's no joy in it. And so while I might not enjoy doing my dishes or making my bed or hanging up my laundry or getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and getting to work, and nobody's forcing me to do those things, what I've found is that those things bring me much longer term joy than the sitting around and eating crap and watching Netflix or whatever those things are, the time wasters. And so for me, it's that order brings joy and it's not fleeting, right? It's less fleeting than the instant gratification piece. And so, and then you say, well, like, why are you bringing that order? I'm not bringing the order so I can impress the neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
The order is there because it gives me a sense of control in the midst of chaos that I don't have control. I have no control over how this thing spreads, but I have control over the order inside my house. So that's why we do it.
Yeah.
One of the first things we tell our clients they need when they start strength training is a great weightlifting belt. And Blake and Katie from Dominion Strength Training make the highest quality belts on the planet. Dominion is a wonderful small business, literally two people who have spent years refining their craft to personally hand make every single belt on their site as the orders come in. They aren't shipping something that they pull off a shelf, but are actually building your personal order from the raw materials, sewing the belts on these wonderful 100-year-old leather sewing machines that produce a much better stitch in the heavy leather than any of the more modern, lightweight machines. And much of the finish work, especially in finishing the edges, is done by hand. So this just gives your belt a much more aesthetic finish than feeding the belts through a machine. So for the finest quality, artisanal, handcrafted, but heavy-duty belts, all with a lifetime warranty, go to DominionStrengthTraining.com where you can choose the Barbell Logic 4-inch leather belt or any other high-quality belt there and receive $10 off your belt order with discount code LOGIC. That's DominionStrengthTraining.com, discount code LOGIC for $10 off your belt order.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think also, I have watched some Netflix recently. I'm not coming from like a place that, I don't also get tempted or struggle or, or get
Absolutely.
sort of drawn into
By the
it.
way, us too, right? Like we've done the same thing.
Yeah.
So we've been there.
But at the same time, I woke up this Saturday at 4 a.m. and I recorded my COVID-19 podcast and put it out there to, 10,000 psychiatrists and mental health professionals, equipping them to better understand the nuances of the medications and what we're up against. And, I spend hours in the evenings digging into the content to prepare for that. That is personally my little area of trying to help this situation.
Sure.
At this point in my life, that's where I can make the biggest impact. Now, I also make impact talking to my patients and seeing people and being on call and, mentoring the residents and stuff. But there's a multiplier effect with podcasts right now. You can get it out there in front of a lot of people.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's like, how do you create that? For me, how do I create that order? It's like, yeah, if I had a messy house, if I had a bunch of chaotic emails, like it would be really hard to create the space to be able to do that.
Yeah, it feels gross, right? Like it feels gross to me. And I'm like you, I'm an ambitious guy and I like work. I enjoy my work. Same thing, I enjoy giving back to people. I feel like I've got opportunities to probably give back in ways that I don't normally have, even right now, or things that maybe there's a little more weight to it. But for me, when my life is out of order, it's very difficult to help others or to think about how I can give back when it could be something as simple as my house is messy, but it could also be something more complicated, like my relationship with my wife or my kids. There's some struggle there.
Yep.
And so I can't give back. And so, so we literally mean make your bed, clean your room. And those are some of the most simple things you could ever do. We also mean this is also probably, I would assume you would put this into the physical and not the psychological, although certainly it bleeds in. All of it does is it's train or exercise with consistency, right? It's that you're sitting at home, you don't have to, right? So we bring order to the chaos. And I know you want to move at some point to the psychological side of this as well. Where do you put that? Where do you put that training?
Right.
Is that the physical side as well?
So the first is the physical order of the house, the structure, organizing your house. The second is probably the physical body, right? So organizing your physical body, having a plan. I would say most of your listeners already have had that, right? And if they don't do any cardio, I don't know, this might be a good time to do some cardio to kind of decrease that anxiety as well, like some walking or even that, as well as doing their lifting. But they've been doing that for years, or at least if they've been listening and doing, squatting and stuff, they've been doing that for years. And so not neglecting that in this time, right? Finding ways to do that in this time. That would be number two. Number three would be the psychological order. So how do they not just distract themselves from their thoughts, right?
Hmm.
So, maybe journaling out their thoughts, putting their anxiety on trial. I put together a cognitive distortion journal. I'll give you the link to it. They could just download it.
Which I've done that. I assume that's the one that I did in the past.
It's the one you did.
It's great.
I've changed it a little bit actually for COVID-19, putting in.
Oh, okay, cool. It's great. It's awesome. And you do it every day, right? Is it 8 days? How long is it right now?
There's a 9-day because I added some of the Victor Frankl stuff in and journaling.
Yeah.
But you can repeat it over and over again I think until you get it to the point where you're able to put your thoughts on trial. And just to give you guys an idea what this is, it's like, imagine you have thoughts like all or nothing thinking, or overgeneralization. You overgeneralize from one bad situation over to everything, or jumping to conclusions, predicting the future. These are cognitive distortions. We can't really predict the future. So we put the thoughts on trial, and then we learn how to rewrite our thoughts to be more accurate. And essentially, this is cognitive therapy that you can do on yourself.
Right.
And so you don't need a therapist to do it. It sometimes helps, but it's cognitive therapy. It's evidence-based to help you decrease your anxiety, decrease your depression, improve your mood, and also prevent you from future mood issues. So if you've never done that, I think it could be really valuable. For example, they did this on people who were going to be residents in medicine. So they did this to fourth-year medical students. It decreased their depression, suicidality in that first 3 months, which is the highest risk 3 months of their career, pretty much.
Sure.
Because it's so stressful, 80 to 100-hour work weeks, everything's new, not everyone in the hospital is nice. And so there's this incredible stress in that first 3 months that I went through and other people go through. And so it's like doing this type of thing before they went into it actually prepared them to be able to handle the stress. So yeah, number three would be creating some psychological order and not just kind of passively, allowing your thoughts to run free.
So you talked about the cognitive distortions journal. Are there some other good, just basic practical takeaway examples of what our listeners can do that, to help put themselves in psychological order? What are some other great options for them?
If they're stuck in an environment and they're stuck in a place where they're anxious or distressed, I think finding a therapist can be really helpful. They change their environment, have someone look at your thoughts with you, the distressing thoughts. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It could be a very thoughtful spiritual leader. It could be a friend, but having someone to be able to process some of their more anxious thoughts. There's a lot of people, a lot of guys who they think it's almost like weakness to have those thoughts, to have distressing thoughts, so they don't want to tell anyone about it. So they basically just push it down. There's a time to push things down. I think it's helpful to find a space where you can process through those things. If your environment is not allowing you to do it by yourself, change your environment.
Yeah, I was thinking about how helpful just having conversations with people about this has been for me. But my environment is such that the people I'm having the conversations about it, they're good listeners, they're encouraging, they're not yes men. It's not that, but it's also not a cycle of negativity. And so I've actually found a tremendous amount of value even talking on almost a daily basis to my wife and my daughters about what's going on and how's this affecting you guys, and just kind of, I think, just talking through the thing, being able to emote and being able to be honest about what we're feeling. And I think, if you're not careful and you surround yourself with the wrong people, that could turn into sort of a negative spiral if you're not careful. But we try to keep the things positive and remind ourselves, how we're blessed in our lives and whatnot. And I've done the same thing with, members of my life group at my church, or my pastor, or, my sister or my brother, just those conversations. Even having conversations, actually the podcast for me, we've sort of pivoted a little bit in the podcast over the last week or two where, Scott and I, this podcast, we don't do very many interviews on. We are the ones that provide the content. And I think right now, I am not the expert with COVID-19. And so bringing people on to talk about the things that people are worried about or anxious about or interested in has actually there's been a tremendous side benefit for me, and that I've been able to sort of process through those things as well. And so all of those things have been very helpful to me to be able to do. And so, of course, there's been a massive, I don't know what you call it, like telecounseling has exploded in the last few months, right? Like almost everybody, my psychologist, my local psychologist, she reached out to me a few weeks ago. She said, hey, we've all gone online. We can do it now this way and all that kind of stuff. It's been really, really nice. Of course, you and I, I don't hide this, that you and I talk frequently on more of a counseling sort of one-on-one level. And it's been extremely helpful. And so certainly find those people. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. The one other thought that I have on how to create psychological order is to limit the news and limit the watching anxious people talk about their anxiety.
Sure.
It's something that, like, how much do you really need to know? If you watch it, realize you're watching it more as, can you limit it to one time a day? Like, okay, I'm going to, read some articles for half an hour a day on this to figure out what's going on in the world, what's changing. And it's interesting. I was thinking about giving this advice, and I think it's good advice. But then for myself, like, I'm preparing episodes on it. So I'm literally like
in it all the time.
For like a week preparing for this last podcast, like I was like binging on, reading every article I could possibly read, scientific articles on this. And there was a psychological effect that I had because I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking about these articles, thinking about the cases that I was reading about, thinking about the healthcare workers in the field. So there is this, I'm
preaching to yourself as much as everybody else.
I'm preaching to myself. Yeah, I need to.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's different preparing something to share that's going to help other people. I think that, do you really need to watch one of the news channels? Maybe just read the CDC once a day to kind of get your update.
Sure.
I don't know. It might be more valuable, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what we've done. And I think some of it, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. Some of it probably depends on your personality a little bit too. Like I don't really get anxious reading this stuff. It's just a time waster for me to read 4 or 5 hours worth of articles on this thing. And so I give myself about 45 minutes or an hour every night to read. I want to read more about like the cutting edge stuff, like the serological studies are going to be able to start taking blood from people and really getting an idea of how many people have had this thing because they'll know if there's antibodies and stuff. So I like reading about some of that stuff. I like reading about the federal stimulus. How can I help my employees? How can I help my church? How can, people that could potentially take an active role in that? But what I've done is my wife and I both do that at night for a few minutes. And then we stop, we put our phones away, and then we talk through it. Hey, I read this, I saw this, and we kind of process through it. And because we're not super anxious people or depressed, like pessimists, then we don't spiral ourselves into this like pit of negativity. And we're able to kind of talk through the things that we read and process it and like, okay, now we're done for the day. And we don't have to talk about this stuff anymore. And then we move on to like, our schedule has probably been a little tighter since all this stuff has happened. And remember, I've said this on the podcast too. Once I wasn't sick anymore with COVID, I probably have less changes to my life on a day-to-day basis than the vast majority of people because I work from home anyway. My wife's a stay-at-home mom. We homeschool our kids. We live here, right? And so we didn't have to figure out how do we all live in the same house together. We've done that for years. But we get up in the morning a lot of times and we have kind of a family meeting and like, this is what's going on for the day. It's almost like a staff meeting.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing today? What school are we doing? And, we've got the rules. Like, we don't sit around in our pajamas. We don't sleep till 10. We get up and we take showers and brush our hair and, brush our teeth. And for the girls, they put a little makeup on. They put on normal clothes and shoes and we eat regular breakfast. And all those things are normal and they provide some normalcy to the day. And then, my wife, I have more time even on my hands than I normally, because I don't have business meetings and we don't go to restaurants. And certainly we're not going out and meeting other people or having them come here. And so there's more time. But we decided several nights ago, like, hey, we're not going to watch any more than 2 hours of Netflix in any given day or in whatever streaming. So like that's max for us. I'm like, we're not doing this binge because I just feel gross when I do it. I don't mind watching some stuff. Like it's fine. But what we've done is, so we've kind of got our time immediately after dinner and we usually just watch about 1 hour of television. And then we read, usually about COVID, and then we talk. And then we move on and we lay in bed and we read a book together, separate fiction books that kind of take our minds completely off this thing so we can relax and sleep. And it's worked really, really well to sort of have that schedule. We eat dinner together as a family every single night, right? Most of the nights we're cooking at home. Occasionally we DoorDash because, it's great. And like you said, it's brought some order to the chaos for us. And this is a little bit of a new normal even for us, but it feels okay.
Yeah,
for sure.
I have one more category of bringing order.
Yeah.
There's a spiritual order that I think we can bring to our lives.
Yep.
In that category, even if you're not a spiritual person, I think you'll appreciate these things. If there's people you need to forgive, if there are amends that you need to make, can you use this space to do some of those things? Now, I have an episode on forgiveness. One of the things that I say about forgiveness is it's not saying that what happened was wrong.
Not wrong.
I mean, it's not saying that what happened was not wrong. Like, it's actually saying, like, actually, it was wrong what happened to me. And if you're spending emotional energy during the day, then you might be bitter. So if you spend like 5% of your day thinking about this thing where you were wronged, or, do you really want to spend that? It doesn't have to be someone that It could be like, if you spend 20% of your day angry at some politician or some person that you don't even know, like that might be something that you need to work through psychologically or spiritually as well, right?
Yep.
So in my mind, I don't want to have to spend any emotional energy thinking about people who have wronged me in the past. And so through the process of like letting go, and I think it's really helped clear my brain to allow me to think about things that are actually meaningful.
That's good. Yeah. And I think about, as you laid this stuff out, like 1, 2, 3, and I'm sure you did this on purpose, is the best place to start with some of those simple physical things, because it almost doesn't matter where you are. Like, you can make your bed, you can clean your room, you can bring a little bit. It's not even about, like, even that can get overwhelming. Like, you don't literally have to completely organize your house today. You can start literally with something like making your bed or hanging up your laundry, like a simple task. And then it seems like there's a little more depth with each one of those.
Look at one area of your house at a time. So for example, like your closet. Like, are there clothes that you haven't used in 2 years that are in your closet? Maybe put them in a pile, give them away. So take one little area of your house at a time and create order, like, how is this stuff serving me? How is this organized so that I can use it in time of need, or, basically that it's not just chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah. One little area at a time.
Yeah. Or even things as simple as maybe decide the day before, what time am I going to wake up tomorrow? What time am I going to go to bed tomorrow? And then stick to that, right? And it doesn't have to be 4 a.m., right? It doesn't have to be like what you and I do, but I'm going to get up at this time, get up at 6, or I'm going to get up at 7, or whatever it is. I'm going to go to bed by 10. Those are pretty easy things to do. And then as I think about it, you work then on your physical body, and that takes a little more work and a little more planning. What am I going to eat? How am I going to exercise? I'm going to take care of myself this way or that way. It requires some planning as well. And then you step into that psychological piece, and there's probably a little more weightiness to that as well. Certainly probably evokes more emotion than making your bed, dealing with my anxieties, dealing with my fears, talking to people, journaling, cognitive distortions. All of those things are very important. It's a little more weighty than making your bed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think probably some of the hardest things for us are those of us who need to let go of something greater, and some of those, spiritual health issues of forgiving people that not for them. It's not for them, right? It's for you. It's to give you free, because you live in bondage to that thing. And so, or whatever those things are, make things right with people, make things right if you believe in a higher power, making things right there as well, I think is maybe even the most weighty of all. So I think you've given people a good, I don't want to package it in a pretty little, present tied up in a neat little bow package, but I also think there's some sort of pragmatics in the simplicity of start with the very first thing that's small and do the small thing first, and then start working through.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's these 4 different kind of domains: physical order of your space where you live, your physical body. And then 3 would be the psychological order. And then 4 would be kind of more of the spiritual. And, I think the other thought that I have is and sort of in that spiritual domain, is kind of one spiritual aspect is, I think, the kind of sacrificial love, or the agape love. It's like the love for other people that is to serve the other people first and foremost. And in that, think in your life, no matter where you are, what does that look like? Are there little areas where you can do that to other people, for other people? And, if you're a parent, it might be putting the phone away and just sitting with your kid, giving them attention. If it's your business, like you said today, you're thinking about the people who are in your business. You're thinking about how to help them financially through this time. And, realize that people will not always be as receptive to that, but it's like you're doing it for them. You're not doing it for yourself.
Sure.
And then, it might be your neighbor, we wrote letters to our neighbors, like that are older, checking in on them, maybe calling the person that's maybe a little bit more socially isolated. I don't know, but thinking about like, we're in this together. This is going to be a tough time. This is going to be a time where we can live out for other people maybe a little bit more and listen to that voice. If you have that voice, listen to it.
That's good. Don't give in to the animalistic behavior. That's the key.
All the time.
Always enlightening, sir. Thank you so much. Lots of great. I love it because we walk through sort of these big sort of philosophical things, and then you help make it practical for our listeners, which is nice. So hopefully everybody's got some great takeaways there that they can begin to put into practice. As always, thank you for being on the show. Dr. Puder will always be, I say always, hopefully will always be a routine guest for us. And while we don't do a lot of interviews, this is, when you're on the show, it's not an interview, right? It's a content episode that I can't provide and that Scott can't provide, that we can't provide, because we want to bring on some of those professionals that can do a good job of filling a gap for our people.
I hope it's a dialogue, and I hope it's a dialogue with your listeners as well. Once you get this up, I'll post it to my social media. If anyone has any comments or questions, just throw up a comment on my social media. And if you just look up David Puder, you'll be able to find me. Or if you go to psychiatrypodcast.com, that's my website. I'm putting the Cognitive Distortion Journal like right at the very, very top of that main website. So psychiatrypodcast.com, it'll be right there at the very top. You don't have to put in your email or anything, just download it. I'll get you that link as well so you can share that.
Yeah, we'll have it in the show notes as well for sure. Great place to start. I did it several months ago. It was tremendously helpful for me.
It was hard.
Those things out. It is hard. It is hard. Actually, I went through it twice, and it was easier, significantly easier for me the second time.
Okay.
You know, because you kind of get through and you see the big picture, and I realized, and maybe I needed to do it 4 or 5 times. I think each time you get through it, it's a little bit easier. I say easier. I mean, you still have to deal with your junk, but I think because in the beginning, you're trying to figure out what your junk actually is. Like, you don't even realize where you have these cognitive distortions.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've gone through it once, you sort of have a foundational list of, I know that it's in my nature to have these distortions. You know, have I put some of those away? Have I brought on new ones? It's a little easier to have something to work off of. First time through, you're kind of thinking through like, okay, what do I have cognitive distortions about? But it's extremely helpful just to bring those to light, you know, just to go like, oh, I didn't realize that's not reality. I think in something that's not reality there. And you're like, you don't even realize you're doing it. So yeah, extremely helpful. We'll put those in the show notes. Thank you guys for listening. So good. Anything else from you?
Nope. Should be good. Thank you for having me on.
Beautiful. Thanks for being on the show. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you in a few days.